Thank you so much for inviting us to present on our project, the Dyke Road Coastal Resiliency project. This has been a project in the works for a very long time. I think really it got started in 2021, and we'll touch on that later in the presentation. There's a timeline where you can kind of see just like the evolution of this project and just like the, just the time that's gone into it and how long these projects can actually take. So I'm just going to hopefully work through my screen here to be able to go through. Okay, there we go. So just introducing Dan and I. As you know, my name is Robin Holm, and I'm the manager of long-range planning and sustainability at the Comox Valley Regional District. And the planning team led the original project initiation stage of this project, the planning and the design phase. And then I'll let Dan introduce himself.
Thanks, Robin. Hi, everybody. My name is Daniel May. I'm the Senior Parks Technician with the Comox Valley Regional District. And I manage a lot of our capital projects within our park system, including Denman and Hornby Island and other ones happening in the Comox Valley. And as Robin just mentioned, it's been a very collaborative project between CVRD parks and CVRD planning, moving from the sort of planning stage and then into the implementation stage, which is where we are now. When we moved from the sort of planning to implementation, I kind of moved into the project management role for this project.
First, I'd just like to situate us. Dyke Road Park is located in the unceded territory of the Comox First Nation, the traditional stewards of this land. The park is very close to IR1 along the estuary, the Comox estuary, and this area is very rich in cultural heritage and archaeology. And that's why it was very important for the nation to be involved in this project. And again, we're going to speak to this a little bit more. But this partnership really evolved over the duration of this project, and we think that that's really important, that sometimes when you're starting out, you don't really realize how significant certain partnerships are going to be. And so this is one that was really, really critical to the project. So first off, just to give you kind of like an idea of what we're going to be talking about today, first off, I'm going to start with a bit of an overview of the project, go over the project process and the objectives, and then we're going to touch on some of the themes that that really came out of the project, and then we're hoping to share with you some of the insights that we think are maybe something useful to think about when at your own organizations you might be thinking about taking on similar projects. These are really kind of like we feel like our lessons learned or things that we would carry forward moving on to future work. So just starting us off, Dyke Road Park is a very small park. It's only half a hectare. And as you can see on the top map, it's these 4 parcels, which are a license of occupation from the province that the CVRD manages. It's located right in the middle of almost like everything in the Comox Valley. It's located between Courtenay, the town of Comox, Comox First Nation, and it's actually located in electoral area B. And then the road is managed by the Ministry of Transportation and Transit. As well, this area has a long history of industrial use, and even this area where the park exists is really just made from fill from previous industrial sites, the making of the road and a sawmill that was down the estuary. In 1988, a concrete viewing platform was constructed along with the gazebo that you can see there, and that is really how the project has, the park has looked since 1988. So when we first started this project in 2020, 2021, we started to recognize that that the concrete foundation that the bird viewing platform was on, concrete foundation was failing, but it was also acting as hard armoring. The concrete wall was creating a lot of erosion and a scour at the base, and just basically creating a hard wall, and the shoreline was starting to destabilize. And so this was something, when we first started looking at this site, we saw as being something that needed to be addressed. So as I mentioned, this project has been in the works for quite a long time. And back in 2021, when this project really got on the radar of the Parks Department as being, identified for some upgrading, we were also approached by the Stewardship Center of BC as a part of their local government working group for Green Shores as a pilot project. And the idea was to construct a demonstration site at this park. And so we had applied for some funding back in 2021, and we were successful. We found out in 2022. And so this project started as a very small budget, just to give you an idea, about $90,000. And this was enough money for us to have a coastal feasibility study, as well as a biophysical feasibility study done, just to give us an understanding of what was existing on site and what were the potential for some shoreline treatment. And in 2022, in the spring, we convened our partners, as well as invited some stakeholders to attend, and we hosted a design charrette. And at this design charrette, we had Comox First Nation Guardians, we had Mid-Island Guardians of the Estuary. I think they've changed their name multiple times. I'm looking at Dan to be like, did I get that right? But I'm not. Dan, did I get that right?
They're now referred to as Goose, so Guardians of our Salish Estuaries, but they were originally, at that time when we first started, Mid-Island Guardians of the Estuaries. So,
okay.
Yeah.
Thank you. And then we also had Project Watershed, and then we had invited some of our consultants that were like our technical experts. So this would be our coastal engineers, as well as a landscape architect. And so visiting the site, that's what in those photos you can see. And then we had a design charrette where everyone got all of their ideas and essentially hopes and dreams and drew them out, and was really imagining what could be in this site. And remember, it's just half an acre, so it's a very small site, but what ended up emerging was some very lofty, goals or vision for this area. And it was at that time the decision was made to increase the scope and the budget to really execute this project as was kind of, envisioned at that design charrette. Technical advisory committee was convened, and this was really just to guide the process and to ensure that there was input being gathered from all of those involved in the project team along the way. And then it was at this time that we really had to figure out how this project was going to be implemented. And that was really taking it from an idea to an actual, like, executing it and building it. And there's quite a bit that has to go into that. There was obviously figuring out the funding piece, identifying what the project budget would be, and then the many permits that would be required given the jurisdiction of the estuary, and just how complicated that is. And Dan can speak to that later when we get into a little bit more about talking about the implementation of the project. And so it's just recognizing these projects do have distinct phases, and different departments are responsible for leading those different phases, and identifying the complexity of such a project. So just right off the hopper, some of our early objectives were implementing that Green Shores, like a nature-based solution to shoreline management. It was restoring and enhancing that habitat, protecting the cultural archaeology that we know is really rich in this area. From a parks perspective, it was really like wanting to enhance that visitor experience. And then you'll see also in a photo of just, there was so much permeable surface in this area. And so that was something, when looking at redesigning the park, we really wanted to improve that. So I'm going to pass it over to Dan to be able to speak to the design of the park and walk through how the changes, kind of like what was existing and then what we're moving to.
Yeah, thanks, Robin. That last picture was actually taken after a portion of the viewing platform had been removed, and we were doing sort of archaeological monitoring, in sort of inspections of the ground underneath the old concrete foundation. And that's the Comox First Nation working with the archaeological consultant Baseline, going through that process. So yeah, this the picture on the slide right now, that was a picture of the existing, or the old Dyke Road Park. You can see it's largely was just like a pull in, pull out, a large parking area with with sort of a covered gazebo portion of a viewing platform, and then a large uncovered sort of railed section of a viewing platform. And off to the, I guess it would be sort of the top left of that, you can see a lot of the green space there. That's a lot of the park space as well, but at that point in time was largely unused by the public. It was a lot of that material had just been moved in there as the Comox Road was being built, and there was a lot of just sort of fill material, and had largely just been inhabited by invasive species and whatnot. So at that time, people would just pull in, park their cars, maybe just stay in their car, look out at the estuary. Obviously, beautiful views, and then you'd have the viewing platform there where people would use that for viewing the glacier, the estuary, taking pictures of birds and other plant life. However, one thing we realized, and as we were show that picture of us sort of on that viewing platform doing before we did our original sort of design shred, is when you're on that platform, the sound and the noise from Dyke Road is just ever present. You know, the cars sort of passing by, and so it kind of takes away from a little bit of the experience of when you're just sort of viewing out into the estuary in these natural spaces. So yeah, definitely as we sort of moved towards sort of some conceptual designs as a group and some ideas, part of that was trying to obviously look at the park site through the eyes of sort of climate resiliency and a green shores approach, but also to naturalize a lot of the spaces that were there with the parking and definitely minimizing the size of the viewing platform and trying to kind of replant a lot of that parking area as well. Do you have the picture of what's the next one? Do you mind moving to the next one there? Yeah, perfect. So the design we're looking at here, which is not exactly, this was one of the this was our sort of preferred conceptual design. The landscape architect we were working with had put together a couple preferred design, or a couple of conceptual design options based on our sort of design shred and a lot of the ideas that the group had. And this was sort of the preferred design, which you can see the parking lot sort of been largely put on a diet. Again, sort of a pull in, pull out, 8 diagonal parking spots, but all much closer to the road. And then definitely sort of like a planting buffer between that parking area and the new viewing platform, which you can kind of see there. It's much smaller in terms of footprint. And then basically just kind of gravel paths in that upper upland area that sort of connect the parking lot with the main viewing platform. And you can see on the sort of bottom right of the design, there's another little picnic node, it's called, on there. So basically another sort of viewing platform, which would be more uncovered, but just sort of facing out towards Goose Spit. So that would be sort of the upper area. And I should note that as we were going through this design and implementation process, we kind of broke the project up into 2 phases. Phase 1, which is largely what you see on the sort of left-hand side of the design, what we're calling that lowland sort of estuary piece. And phase 2, which is sort of the upland parking area, more of the park infrastructure piece. So phase 1, which is the estuary piece, is where a lot of the big changes to the sort of the park experience were made, and a lot of that came through that design shred, where we had this sort of plan to in that space, try and regrade that area, actually create some new, sort of enhance the habitat, create some new sort of marsh habitat, a little bit of a fish channel that sort of connects into the estuary in two locations, a little bit of an island location that would be kind of created through that, which is a beautiful big snag. There's always an eagle on there, and then a boardwalk that would sort of take people out to another viewing platform that would be kind of almost within the estuary piece, or would take you over this newly created sort of estuary marshland piece of the project. So yeah, just basically trying to really naturalize the site, taking into account the climate resiliency piece, making sure it could withstand sort of flood impacts into the future, but also maybe create a bit more of a curated walk or experience for the park users, and sort of tying together that sort of park experience, but also sort of the naturalized sort of estuary piece. And this picture here again takes that sort of design and actually shows this is sort of the more updated design. Originally, we had that boardwalk kind of finishing on that where the number 3 is. That's sort of like an island. So when the tides rise, it's kind of like creates a little bit of an island there, so that the boardwalk sort of touches on the island, crosses over the estuary sort of fish channel, crosses back over, and then goes to a new viewing platform. That's sort of, you're kind of within this newly created estuarine habitat, marsh habitat. So again, sort of really allowing people to kind of experience the park as well as the estuary and the tidal change that happens over the course of a day. And but also sort of, again, sort of more of a curated experience for folks, so people are maybe a little less inclined to kind of create new pathways down to some of these more sensitive ecosystems. And that's the picture as if you would experience it with a high tide, sort of walking over the newly created fish channels to a viewing platform that's essentially kind of built up on helical piles. So you're kind of almost like floating above the water, and just being able to kind of experience a lot of the new design, but also that sort of fish channel and habitat.
So as I mentioned earlier, there was really, I would say, 4 sort of outcomes or lessons that became very clear that we were learning along the way. These weren't necessarily our objectives or project objectives when we were originally getting started. They were just strengths that the project ended up having along the way. And so those were collaboration, innovation, resilience and restoration, and then education. So we're just going to go into a little bit more detail in each one of those. So as mentioned, it was a very big, project team. We had multiple project partners. We had a number of consultants and stakeholders, nonprofit groups that were involved in this. And with expanding that project team, we ended up having, it's like, many cooks in the kitchen sort of thing. We every group that came to the table had their own set of objectives that they were trying to accomplish. And with that, with increasing the size of that project team, we really had that increased scope in the project, and we had an increased budget. And so we ended up really looking at this as a really quite comprehensive and holistic approach to this project. If the planning department or the parks department had approached this within our own department, the project would have ended up being an entirely different project. We would have gone out there and we would have been really quite limited. It would have been a resiliency project if it was a planning project, and if it was a parks project, it would have been a redevelopment of the park. But because we had this really collaborative and multidisciplinary group, we were able to achieve many things, and many of these objectives have been what has strengthened the project to what it is now. We were able to really look at building the resiliency of this site. The CVRD, the planning department, has completed a number of study and mapping to show sea level rise and the impact of coastal flooding. And this area along Comox Road, and specifically Dyke Road Park, experienced annual flooding during king tides and storm events in the winter. And so using that mapping, we were able to inform what the site would need to be built in order to withstand future flooding. And so as a part of that, we have built the site up to 2,100 flood construction level, and this will help build the flood resiliency in the entire region. This helps to protect the archaeology that's in the area, as well as protect the farmlands. There's a highly valuable farmlands that are just behind Dyke Road, Comox Road, and this prevents salination of those soils. So, and this was a part of the justification for a large grant that we were successful in receiving was the value that building up the flood resiliency of this site would do for the entire area. The estuary also serves a big function in carbon sequestration. And as well, there was the introduction that Daniel had mentioned with the creation of a tidal channel and the enhanced tidal marsh habitat. And this ties into several other restoration projects that are just down the estuary, and having that connectivity and having the same nonprofit groups as well as consultants involved in this project has really enhanced the ability just in terms of the effectiveness of the approach and enhancement in this area. And I'll let Daniel speak to these actions under resilience because they were really managed under Parks Department here.
Yeah, that's actually a picture of me throwing some plugs in the ground that could be. We had 2 or 3 different volunteer planting programs that sort of happened to plant the 30,000 new plants that were installed just as part of the phase 1 estuary portion of the project. So yeah, just speaking to the reduction of impermeable surfaces, obviously, like I'd mentioned earlier, sort of removing a lot of the parking area and sort of really reducing the size of that and increasing the amount of plantings that we were doing in there. Obviously removing a lot of the viewing platform as well, reducing the size of that and increasing the amount of sort of gravel surfacing and planting that were up in the phase 2. Phase 1 was really interesting because we removed a lot of the invasive species from the estuary piece. We were able to kind of, as we excavated the fish channels, we stockpiled all of that material that was excavated out there into 2 piles. One that sort of had a lot of the invasive species in it, and then a second pile, which was the lower gravel surfacing that we were able to put into a separate pile that we later used to build out the Carex bench that we built out further into the estuary. I can speak to that a little bit later. So kind of in essence able to sort of manage a lot of the invasive species in there, remove them, but also reconstruct the grades so that we were creating grades that were going to be very beneficial to the native plants that we put in and less beneficial in terms of the heights to the invasive species. And then upon completing the, building out the new sort of marsh habitat, as well as the Carex bench further out into the estuary, we worked with the goose group, so the guardians of our Salish estuaries, and they work closely with the Comox First Nation to reconstruct a lot of the goose fencing that you'll see when you're out driving along Comox Road and looking out towards the estuary. And that goose fencing is implemented to protect the estuary plant species that the Canada geese graze on, and then as they graze on those species and we lose those species in there, there starts to sort of become an erosion effect out in the estuary, and then we start losing a lot of these Carex bench flats. So just being able to recreate fencing to protect that, the fencing basically breaks up the flight plan of the geese, and so they're less likely to want to land in there and graze. So that was really sort of great to work with the goose and the KFN to rebuild those fences out there. Yeah, I think that's.
Yeah. We can both talk about this, Dan. Education has ended up being a really big component of this project, as it was originally, a pilot project for a demonstration site for Green Shores. It's ended up being much more than that. Just now, this is going to be an area where anyone in the community can come and see what climate resiliency, coastal resiliency actually looks like. because the parks are actually within the CBRD's jurisdiction, this is an area where we can actually build and implement all of the policies that we're trying to encourage for property owners to undertake themselves. And it really helps people understand what preparing for sea level rise looks like, the idea that resiliency is so much more than just building up your property. Everything about this design takes resiliency into consideration. So it's removing those invasive species, it's planting the native species, it's working with your local First Nations. Everything about this project was really trying to be able to demonstrate to the community and explain the process that we took. And so as a part of this, there's going to be new signage that is going to be constructed. And Dan can speak to this in more detail because he's leading this work, but it's working with the First Nations to make sure that the signage is reflective of the history of this area as well as the site.
Do you want me to speak to that now?
Yeah, if you can, Joe.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, this the signage plan is it's ongoing. As Robin mentioned, we're working closely with the Comox First Nation to help create. They're providing obviously content for a lot of the cultural history of that site. Plants, how they would have used the site in the past. Obviously, there's a very large fish trap complex out in the Comox estuary. So there's a lot of information that could be provided in terms of that fish trap complex in itself, but also sort of historically, how the First Nations would have accessed the estuary and used those fish traps. And and there's also a possibility. So really, allowing the Comox First Nation to sort of provide their own story for that site, and but also tie that into the Green Shores piece. So making sure the community, the park users, kind of understand, the Green Shores approach to shoreline rehabilitation, shoreline protection, and then also tying into a little bit of the work that the Goose Group and the KFN working together for the fencing that's out there, because folks are always asking us about the fencing. Kind of, is that the fish trap complex? What are we looking at looking at out there, and so to understand why those are being erected and sort of the purpose behind those in terms of protecting a lot of the work that we're doing. So I'm really excited to see how the sign plan finishes up. And the Comox First Nation, I believe, we're also working within their community to come up with a new name for the site, and also a lot of the content will be plants and sort of a lot of their language. So real great opportunity to provide a ton of education about the project site, but also the historical use there. This picture here is taken from the very end of the boardwalk. This is sort of that viewing platform where you can imagine this is in a low tide. So those spots just down to the left of the boardwalk, you can see that's a lot of the newly created estuarine marsh habitat in there. And so you can imagine on a high tide, that all being filled with water. You can see sort of the upland plantings in the back. Those will eventually sort of grow in and provide one sort of privacy from the road, but also, very important environmental sort of habitat for birds and protection for the fish in the channel. And then way back there, you can see a car park. That's where the parking lot is, and that's basically where that upland phase 2 part, which we're hoping to begin construction on this fall. So, it feels like a small site, and it largely is, and I guess the grand scheme of things, but there's a lot going on in a small area. And as I mentioned, there's 30,000 plants that have already been put in just in terms of this, the new marsh created territory area, as well as the upland sort of riparian plantings.
So one of the other things that came out of this project was innovation. As mentioned, it was a very collaborative process. But what I think was really interesting about this is because we had so many people involved in our project, as I mentioned, budget increased, but it was also because of this large team, we were able to come up with a number of funding opportunities. When we landed on our preferred concept, each, like group in the project team went their own separate ways and went looking for money. And so it was really interesting to see what everybody was able to come back to the table with. The CBRD was able to secure a grant around 1.2 million through UBCM. And Dan, you're going to have to help me because I know there was so many people brought pots of money in, and it was because we knew this project was going to cost a lot if we were going to be able to execute it. But Dan, are you able to speak to the other groups and what?
Yeah, I believe we're at 6 or 7 different funding sources now. The large one being that the grant through the UBCM. Nature's Trust has provided some funding. It it's important to note that for the project site, our license of occupation for the province is not the entirety of the project site. We actually worked with one of the other big projects that's been going on in the estuary here, the Couscoussum site, for those of you that might be aware of that project, which is happening basically where the Courtney River exits into the estuary. But they've been doing a large sort of rehabilitation of that sort of renaturalizing of that area. And so we've been working. They've been one of the project collaborators from the beginning. They were able to find some funding through a different funding source, and were able to allow us to do some work that was sort of outside of our license area, but still within that sort of contiguous piece of land where our project, you know, to the extent of our project. So rather than just like, oh, we were going to end our project right where our license ends, we were able to kind of like do the entirety of that piece of land through some of the funding that came from them. We were able to get some funding towards from Ministry of Transportation towards that goes towards some basically to cover the cost of some plants. BC Hydro has a greening grant that we were able to get some plant costs covered. So yeah, a variety of different sources, and that the funding sort of search continues as we move into phase 2. But we'll see once we kind of like complete all the procurement for phase 2, kind of where we stand. But yeah, it's become complex, but also it's been pretty cool, pretty amazing to see all the groups that have sort of come out in support of this project, and a lot of that's come through the collaboration with these different groups on this project. So
yeah, and do you want to speak to the next point, Dan? You're muted, Dan.
Sorry, which one?
Do you want to speak to the next one? This is the one we were just talking about, the balanced approach.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, so this is yeah, so it really was like as kind of mentioned, there was a lot of different groups involved in the project, and sort of each group kind of comes with their own ideas and those things that are important to them. And so it was important in this project to try and come up with a design that sort of incorporated as many of those sort of ideas as possible for the greater good of the entire project. And so wherever we could, obviously we were trying to marry this idea of like obviously park infrastructure. It was a well-used park in the past and people use it a certain way, but now we were incorporating this sort of new sort of more nature-based approach to the entire project. So the incorporation of a boardwalk into the estuary was not initially sort of a really something that a lot of the project collaborators were in love with that idea, but I think they came around to that as we move forward in terms of that sort of education piece that came out of this, and allowing people to experience sort of this new habitat that was created in a low impact way. And so being able to build this boardwalk up on these helical piles, quite a low impact way for that construction piece with a very long lifespan as well, which is one of the other reasons we chose that option. And again, being able to, sort of direct people through the entire park space, but without it sort of being fragmented into a lot of different, pathways that are often kind of created if you don't sort of provide some other option. We were able to, when we removed the old viewing platform, we were able to kind of reuse a lot of the the materials that came from that demolition. We were able to take apart the old the old covered gazebo in one piece and transport that with all of the concrete, crushed up concrete and wood products. And we were able to take those over to the Department of National Defense at the base, and they were able to reuse it to build sort of a disaster response training facility to almost kind of create like what they would experience after an earthquake or something with rubble and whatnot, and be able to sort of like go through training procedures. So keeping all that material out of the landfill was a great win, and for them to be able to use it as for a new training facility was obviously a great win for them. And I did touch a little earlier on the sort of planting elevations, being able to kind of remove the invasive species and redesign, recontour, that estuary area to be able to help the native plants flourish and sort of remove those grades in which the invasive species were flourishing in the past. As I mentioned earlier, we removed all those invasive species, we piled them up, and then we actually were able to take them out and put them down as the very lowest or the first sort of soil lift out in the estuary, where we rebuilt where the old Carrick's bench flats were, and then we brought in a lot of that other material that we'd stockpiled that didn't have the invasive species in. Again, kind of burying this soil with the invasive species out in an area of the estuary where they're not going to be able to flourish. Obviously, there's going to be some work to manage invasive species in this park going forward, but removing those areas where they're and those heights that they were able to flourish in the past is obviously going to help that cause. Yeah, and then I think we'd already spoke to the geese enclosure, so that was
And I was also just thinking that maybe another point to raise is that it was always balancing these trade-offs, and so part of the project's objectives was to increase the resiliency, build up to the 2100 FCL, but at the same time, we didn't want to do any disturbance in this area because of the archaeology. And so those two actually ended up being mutually reinforcing one another because we built up. There was very little disturbance that was done in some of the areas, and we didn't dig down where we could, and that was to minimize any sort of disturbance of that archaeology. So throughout the entire project, we were always trying to balance and weigh those trade-offs when moving forward with the project.
Yeah, it should be noted there was obviously in that location, as in a lot of the shoreline locations, there is a lot of archaeological influence in those areas, and so we did go through both the new Comox First Nation cultural heritage investigation permit, as well as the provincial permitting, and for this whole project, because yes, there was still a large amount of excavation and earth moving that went in, and that was all done under the monitoring of both the Comox First Nation guardians as well as the archaeological consultant. But yeah.
Yeah. And so, as this project is kind of, I guess maybe winding down and moving on to, I guess, phase 2 of construction, Dan, we're able to really think about what we feel like are like the insights or lessons learned that we would carry forward with future projects, or what we would share with other local governments, organizations that are considering taking on such work. The first is that we think this project created a bit of a blueprint for future projects. And so it really was the first of its kind. It was, really broke down the silos between internal departments, but also really strengthened our relationships with our partners in the community, and really learned the value of these relationships. And moving forward, we're already working on our second project that was like loosely based off of the framework that was put in place for this project. So we're not reinventing the wheel. We have something like a roadmap to really work from. We put in a lot of time, and we invested in these relationships, and they're now in place, and that heavy lifting is supporting future work, and the trust is there. We've established really strong relationships with all of the project team members, as well as the stakeholders, and so that investment will serve us well moving forward. Also, part of this project, we thought it would be important to document the project along the way, and so there will be a bit of a project record, that captures all of these little learnings that we've had over the years in order to, improve or make adjustments as needed to future projects. Dan, did you have anything you wanted to add?
No, I think, yeah, you captured that well. I don't think it can be understated the amount of how much we've learned through this process.
Mm-hmm.
And kind of one part of that is just this understanding of moving from sort of the conceptual plan to the planning of and the permitting and all of these things, and then moving into implementation, and
Mm-hmm.
how big that process can actually be, especially when
Mm-hmm.
you're working in shorelines. And estuaries are even more difficult to work in. They're very tight timelines, specifically for the
Mm-hmm.
construction. So yeah, and I think that annotated summary that the Stewardship Center of BC, who administer
Mm-hmm.
the Green Shores project program in BC, that are going to put together based on this project, is going to be super helpful, not only for us but for other organizations moving forward that are going to be working on similar projects.
Mm-hmm. I'm also just thinking that an important piece or an important learning for us was really having a good understanding of the roles and responsibilities. When you have such a big team, it's really, really important to know who is doing what. It just prevents duplication, also confusion, helps with clarity, helps with budgeting. It's really important to kind of do that front end investment in the project. And we did it, but I wouldn't say it was as formalized as we would if we were doing it now. I think that's something that we would spend even more time. We make use of something called like a project charter, but we didn't at the time. It was kind of it was informal, and it was okay. But I think moving forward, I think having a project charter that can be updated as you go would be really beneficial.
One thing I'm just going to make note on that, Robin, is like, obviously we kind of moved from a initial thought of what the project was going to be.
Yeah.
We kind of came up with a new plan, found funding for that, but with funding comes expectations and timelines, and that
Yeah.
was really the thing that spurred us out of planning and into implementation actually quite quickly, probably too quickly in some regards. So it's a tribute to the whole project team that was able to kind of move through the permitting and design to get us to design, to be able to go through the procurement phase, to actually be able to do those estuary works in a very,
Mm-hmm.
very tight time window of construction in the estuary.
Mm-hmm.
So making sure that understanding of the timelines that are required and those real pinch points in terms of a project like that.
Mm-hmm. And having the right people on the team. Parks is very like they're experts in these capital projects, and for planning, we're experienced in putting plans together, and we're really good at the high level and ideas, and that's where we were very complementary in terms of a CVRD internal team. So I think that's an important thing. It's just making sure you have the right folks at the table. Moving on to the value of collaboration, it can't be underscored enough. We've talked a lot about it, but I think it's like the collaboration, it's almost like the gift that keeps giving. It's like, yes, it helps when it comes to funding. Yes, it helps to make a project, bigger and better. But as Dan moved into construction, this became all the more important. And then maybe I'll let you talk about the importance of coordinating with our engineering folks down the hall.
Yeah, what first kind of was a bit of a challenge of like, well, how are we going to do our project within this much greater and more important, sort of regionally important project of the sewer conveyance, replacement of the sewer line, which was all along Comox Road, right beside our park space. However, it ended up being a very positive experience in that as we collaborated and started working together, we started to see ways that we could support each other in our projects. One thing, the fact that the road was going to be closed for the sewer project to be when it was underway, it gave us a time for where you didn't have to be concerned with the public being in that space, and that we could take our time in terms of like building out our project. But also we were able to provide the sewer conveyance project and their contractors our parking lot before we sort of do any work to remove it, in terms of a place where they could park, do lay down for their projects of their project, and in return they were able to put a PVC line underneath the road before they paved it, so that we were able to tap into the Courtney irrigation, the hydrants across the road, which has been able to provide us with temporary irrigation for all of the new plantings we did, which was a major major boon for our project. So in the end, it became a very complementary working relationship, not just between parks and planning in terms of the CVRD, but engineering and parks as well. So, and it should be noted as well that our emergency services group were the ones that put us in touch with the Department of National Defense to be able to take a lot of our project site materials to help them build out their new facility. So yeah, very, very beneficial in terms of collaborating and supporting each other. And that all just sort of happened as the project kind of moved along.
Yeah. And that really was like I think this project really embraced that all hands on deck sort of approach. And I feel like that really led to the success of the project is everyone, the partners, stakeholders were very committed to this project and have there was periods of where it felt like, I think, Dan, probably when you're going through that procurement process, we were like, how is this going to come together? Others almost like kept the faith, which kept us going. So I feel like that just by all us working together and taking the lead at different points, we were able to just keep that momentum going, and that really led to the project's success. Another thing that we really felt was that through this collaboration, there was a lot of cross-pollination. Opportunities arose or have been almost like spin-off opportunities or benefits that have happened. And Dan, maybe you can speak to the documentary that's in development right now.
Yeah, well, one of the, one group that was basically part of this project from the early days of the technical advisory committee is the Pacific Salmon Foundation. And they were actually part of being, some of the seed funding that we were able to get way back when was done in collaboration with the Pacific Salmon Foundation. So they've been a part of this project from the beginning, obviously very supportive of the project. And they're doing a larger documentary, not just about this project, but about, the coasts all along Vancouver Island, called the Resilient Coast for Salmon. And they're going to be highlighting our project in their documentary, doing some interviews of various project collaborators, including CVRD staff, including the Comox First Nation and some other project collaborators. So, just kind of a cool, other project that's going on, but also sort of tying into some of the work that we did on our project.
Okay, so something that we think cannot be underscored enough too is the time and resources that are required for big projects like this. The collaborative process, interdisciplinary process, it takes more time to get these projects. You have to be able to put the time to invest into the relationships and into the process. And I think it's just really having a good understanding that these things do take many years, and whether that's like you're putting in a grant application or you're doing a very complicated procurement process. As soon as you have archaeology, that you're adding timelines to that. And so I think it's just having really good understanding and awareness about the kind of commitment that's being made. And it needs to be resourced adequately, and there needs to be support and commitment from either senior management or from your elected officials in the process that you have to kind of take it through from these early initial stages all the way through to completion. But something we have realized is that there has been like the project, but then there's also been all of these spin-off opportunities. They also take time. We've gone on a bit of a roadshow with this project just because there has been an interest. We've presented at conferences, we've presented at webinars, and that all takes time, and there's learning in that, and it's really wonderful to be able to share project successes and insights, but it is important that it be recognized that it will take additional time and resources to be able to execute the project well. And as you can kind of see from our timeline here, when it was first really conceived, it was in 2021, and we're here now in 2025, and we've been through all of the different stages throughout the project, and we're still not complete with construction, but soon. And we've received, number of grants and awards. We were fortunate enough to receive the FCM Sustainable Communities Award, and that was something that we had applied for in 2024. We were really excited to be able to put in our application for that, and then we were notified in late 2020. I guess it would have been late 2024 that we were successful in that, and that's also something I think is important to note too, that it does take time, staff time to receive these awards, because of course there's all of the sharing and the reporting out about that project. So just to make sure that if you are applying for awards, that staff have time to put in the work to make sure that you can share that out in all of the communication materials that go along with receiving an award. And I think this might be our last slide. But I wanted and it took us a lot longer than 30 minutes, Caroline, I'm sorry. I wanted just to share with you that do not underestimate the value of some good buzz. This is something that we felt about this project. We were very excited as staff working on this. Our project partners were very excited. And we feel like it might have been a little bit infectious because, word traveled about the project. We were approached last year from the Landscape Architecture magazine. This is an American publication. Somehow this project had landed on the editor's desk and followed up with us. And we were so excited that our small community, in Vancouver Island, had this project featured, and we were able to share about the story of our project. As well, we were able to share all about the project through our FCM award, and I just think that that excitement and that buzz that's out there can really generate a lot of interest and awareness. And then just kind of tying into what I had said earlier on the other slide is that if you're thinking that your project has the opportunity to win any awards, to be, thinking about that along the way. It's really important to document the process and document with photos and be thinking about all of the work that kind of goes into putting in either abstracts or applications, and then thinking about presenting at conferences and sharing about the project, because that does have great impact because you're able to share with your colleagues and get the word out about your project. But just to be thinking about that throughout the project, not at the end, because it's so much harder to go back and try and have that project record after the fact. So those are just some things that I feel like are worth thinking about as you're going into the project. And I feel like for whatever reason, when we started this project, we kind of knew that this project was special, and these were things we were keeping in the back of our mind. And Parks, of course, always has really great photos. They document everything along the way, but we thought it was really important to capture the story of the project, and that's something that we haven't done before, as well as trying to celebrate the success. We often work so hard on our projects, and then when they're finished, we just move on to the next one. And I feel like with this one, we've been trying to celebrate it along the way, because there's been many kind of milestones, I would say. So our FCM award, it wasn't the actual park project. It wasn't that end result. It was actually the process. It was the collaboration process.
Mm-hmm.
It was how we approached this project is why we were recognized. And I feel like that is something that is what really resonated with people. That's what has resonated with our all of our colleagues at conferences, that they're so excited to hear about how you can approach a project in a different way, and the value of breaking down those silos and working together and working with community partners. So yeah, I think, Dan, is there anything else you wanted to add to that?
Robin.
Mm-hmm.
So I hate to say this, I meant to mention this being the meeting. I unfortunately have a conflict. I have to leave at 2:00 to join another meeting. So at this point, I'm going to hand things off to Jessica to chair the last portion of the meeting. Thank you so much for sharing this. There's just so much amazing work here. And as you said, what's remarkable about this, and when I talk about this at conferences, it's the collaborative process that people are grabbed by as much as the end result of this, and just thanks for sharing it. I know we'll be able to share the slide deck with people on the call, and perhaps can get shared back to staff in the other regional districts. There's just a lot to learn from. But anyway, my apologies. I'm going to have to exit the call, but I wish all of you a great rest of the call. And thanks so much, Robin and Dan. Really appreciate your time today.
Of course. I'm sorry to have taken up so much time.
It was a pleasure. Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you.
Well, that is the end.
Thanks. No, it's super interesting. And I want to apply it to my area. Paul, if you're here, I'm hoping you're listening from Nanaimo's perspective, because I feel like this is interesting for the Nanaimo estuary. So we're just from a time management perspective, maybe what we'll do is send out an email just if there's any follow-up questions or anything along those lines. But if someone has something like a really burning question or something they just want to kind of explore at this moment in time, maybe we can take like maybe just a couple of minutes for that. Or okay, I'm not seeing anyone come forward. So thank you guys. That was really interesting. And I have one because I always am thinking this. And I see some hand clapping. Thank you, whoever's doing that. Just curious. I know this is an estuary, but do you see it being applicable to marsh areas that are inland?
Yeah. There are definitely the Green Shores approach is definitely applicable. I don't know about marsh areas, but definitely to lakes. I know that it's applicable there. But I mean, definitely there's definitely opportunities to I don't know how to best say this, but to use sort of like a nature-based approach to maybe rehabilitate marshlands but I can't speak to that with any full conviction.
Okay, thanks.
Yeah.
I think what I'll do is I'll have our staff, well, I'll talk to our staff about this. They're probably already aware, but no, it's really interesting. And I think I'm familiar with the space. And I think I've driven by and thought, ew, like that's not a really pretty space right between Comox and Courtney. And it sounds like I need to drive by again.
Well, it looks a lot different, and it actually looks very cool from the road now. So you might be inclined to stop and go for a walk on the boardwalk. So, yeah. Caroline, I was just thinking you could share Dan's and my email if anybody has any questions they want to follow up, or if the staff want to follow up. We're happy to chat further. And yeah, we realize we've run out of time, but if anyone has any follow-up questions, please feel free to share our contact information.
Awesome, will do. And if you want to send me the slide deck, I can I can send that out as well.
Sure, yeah.
Thank you both. That was amazing.
Yeah. Okay. Thanks.
Well, thank you very much, both of you. I mean, and you're welcome to stay for the rest of the meeting. Although it's going to be mostly just check in with everyone. So feel free to sign off. I know you have lots of work and probably more process to look at the reporting out on this, but thank you for your time.
Yeah. Oh, you're welcome.
It's been really interesting.
Thank you for your interest.
Yeah, thanks everyone.
Have a nice meeting.